everybody. I'm Linda O'Koniewski, and I'm here today with Ramsay Fretz, and we're going to discuss the new normal going forward. What does real estate look like in 2020 when we're allowed to be unquarantined and leave our houses? So we're going to discuss a lot of questions today. We're going to, in addition to saying what does real estate look like going forward, we're going to draw you a picture for what that new normal is going to look like. We're going to create those imageries of how you're going to be conducting business, how buyers and sellers are going to be operating in a new market. We're going to discuss why we have to stop comparing this to 2008. This is not a financial crisis per se. There's very different elements, and we're going to give you some optimism. Look, from what we did learn in 2008, we have drawn some really good data on the under agreements and inventory trends that we're going to share with you to show you how vibrant this market is right now and what pockets and segments are performing better than others. We're going to talk about resetting and reinventing ourselves. And that's not just real estate agents, that's buyers and sellers and real estate companies all have to reset and reinvent. We're going to have some good advice for buyers and sellers. And we're going to give some action steps to agents going forward. And so with that, Ramsay, let's talk about what everybody's talking about. And you gave me a great example just a little bit ago and said, I'm watching agents and of course we're talking to buyers and sellers who are talking to buyers and sellers saying, I can't wait for this to be over, come May 4th or whenever the governor lets us get back into action, then I'm going to be able to help you or as a buyer, I'm going to be able to buy and then I'm going to be able to sell. What is wrong with that theory? Ramsay, I think you're muted.
Actually, I'm sorry, guys. I'm having a little technical issue. Give me 1 second.
That's all right. I'm going to take that question. And with that, I'm going to say, I'm listening to agents and who are talking to buyers and sellers.
Can everyone, Linda, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
It was a wonderful time for my internet to crash, so that was a lot of fun. Sorry, you cut out for a second, but you're talking about everyone's going to be basically assuming that this market's going to come roaring back when we're actually out of our quarantine. The sad thing is that COVID-19 doesn't care about our time frame. And so the toughest thing that we're going to go into is the whole reason we went into this quarantine was specifically so we could level the curve and we could make sure that the amount of people going to the hospitals was the amount that the hospitals could actually handle. We've, I think, done a pretty good job as a society in the last 30 days to do that. But the problem is that this is not going anywhere after the quarantine is lifted. And one of the major companies in Boston gave a talk to all their employees, and they said, COVID-19 is like a light switch. You flick it off, but it's a dimmer on the way on. And so we're not going to see the economy return to normal. We're not going to see life to return to normal in any time in the near future, but we are going to see more and more businesses start to begin. And we're going to see, I think, more real estate transactions start to happen, but they're going to be happening in a very different way.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it. So as we look at buyers and sellers who are going to wait it out, I think what we need to remember is the virus isn't going to disappear just because we can feel better about potentially going to a restaurant or going in and out of our shops. And the consumer mentality has changed. How we're going to show occupied houses is not going to change because this virus isn't going to disappear in 4, 6, 8, 3 months. This virus will be with us until we have a vaccine. And until we have a vaccine and everyone is vaccinated, there are going to be people who have loved ones that they care for, that they need to visit, who are going to be on edge about being contaminated or being with people who could be asymptomatic carriers. And as a result, we're going to see a very different way of doing business permanently. And we've already started that. We've already shown the world that we have all the virtual tools to help people reduce contact when we buy and sell. I can't believe I did that. And with that, that's one way we need to look at it. So what are you seeing for open houses going forward, Ramsay?
Well, I think so. First of all, a quick point on what you were just talking about, the virtual tools. So leading edge, and I'm really proud of our company, the way that we market properties, and I know a lot of other companies have been doing this as well. But we've already been doing proper video tours, Matterports, professional photos, floor plans, and everything that allows you to see the house in its entirety, except for walking actually through the property. And so that's going to become the new normal, where people aren't going to want to go see, in my opinion, 15 open houses on a weekend. They're going to be very careful about the one that they actually choose. And that means that we might actually get a little bit less traffic for properties, but we're going to get more serious buyers. It's like when there used to be a snowstorm and someone would still go see a property, no one's window shopping in the snow. And I think the same thing's going to happen, where no one's window shopping when there is a dangerous virus that could potentially still be out. So for open houses specifically, I think there's going to be a lot of sellers who just say no for a very long time, especially if the property is occupied. And for now, of course, there should be no open houses. But when the market starts to come back, I think a lot of sellers will not want them. I think we're going to be doing more appointment only, even if it is an open house, the longer open house periods, less people in the home, still no touch open houses where you're not supposed to be signing in. And also, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they're almost a one-way open house where, no one goes back in or back out the front door. Everyone moves in the same direction, just like most supermarkets are going now. But I think we're as agents, we have to be prepared that we're going to have to spend a lot more time making sure that there's access for individuals instead of access for groups.
You're absolutely right. So I do think you're going to see that schedule. An open house might be for a couple of hours, but you have to make an appointment to see it. That way the listing agent will be there to answer questions. We're going to see masks and disinfectant and all of those things for a long, long time. I think the verdict on gloves is still out. There's a lot of talk that we're just moving the germs around, that we're better off going in, washing our hands. But that will be all resolved as we learn more and more science is available to us on that. So I'd like to, if we have a second, share our screen here. I've got some interesting data. So let's start with what everyone's talking about is 2008. And to me, that was a financial crisis driven by abuse of how money was being lent out, all of those things. And that's just a totally different animal. And I think there's no comparison. We're in a totally different epic time with different issues, and we have to stop looking back. The only thing we can all have a little solace in here in Greater Boston, Southern New Hampshire, where we're working, is that damn, we did well in the Great Recession. If national home prices dropped by 33% in the Great Recession, and my source on that was the Washington Times. You have places like Las Vegas that were dropping by 60%, Florida, Arizona, etc. Where we do our business predominantly, Middlesex County down 10.7, Suffolk down 21.4, Essex 21.6, etc. On the screen here, we can see that we outpace the market. And that let's remind everyone, we are so lucky to be in a diverse economy with all kinds of sciences and technical services and financial services and hospitals and education. The list goes on. And that, although our employment rate's going to be affected like everyone else, that there are still going to be great demand for housing. That has not gone away, and we did not have enough housing when this started, and that's not going to change. And particularly if sellers are resisting putting their house on the market, then that only is drawing down on the inventory. And we can talk firsthand about how many bidding wars are still going on in the market. You want to talk about that, Ramsay?
Yeah, so it is kind of amazing that there are still bidding wars happening. They are mostly on, as they should be, unoccupied homes, which is that's still really where people are still able to get access. But in compelling markets, we're still getting plenty of activity. And I think that we were talking about on our morning Zoom with our company that there's probably 3 or 4 bidding wars from our agents on the listing and buy side just this weekend. Some of the big changes we are seeing, though, is why are those properties the ones that are in high demand right now, and what are those properties? So we are definitely seeing a shift away from the desirability of the condo market right now into more of the single family market. We're seeing people, if they wanted to be downtown, they're willing to move one farther tier out from Boston. And if they wanted to be in Cambridge, they're all of a sudden willing to be in Winchester, because the little bit of space is becoming more important, a little bit more outdoor space, and also just simply having less contact points with other people between parking your car or walking up to the front of your house and actually getting inside. And so I think we're going to continue seeing a strong market for properties that are well priced, that properties have easy access for getting in without anyone else around them. But it's kind of shocking. I think if we talked about 2 weeks ago during the sky was falling mentality of what's going to happen next, we wouldn't have expected to see bidding wars already. But the market is certainly more excited to get going than I think the general public believes right now.
The couple of things you said earlier, and Devant was mentioning yesterday on our call, was that kind of a migration from people who want to be in the high rises in Boston to brownstones, to
absolutely.
continue on that theme.
Even if you want to stay downtown, and I live in Beacon Hill, I'm in a 33 unit building. I have to touch 2 doors to get to my front door, which means I have to touch a space that 33 other potential families have touched. And that's not very desirable right now. And so if you're looking in the Millennium Tower, if you're looking at the Four Seasons or whatever else it is, all of a sudden you might want to start shifting and saying, hey, if I go to Comm Ave and get a brownstone for the same price, it is, for all intents and purposes, just a single family. And I get to walk up and I get to be kind of touch free from the rest of the public into my house. And people on top of that are really looking for outdoor space. I live across from a building that has quite a few balconies, and they're always empty until the last couple of weeks. It's the same reason I can see the Esplanade from my window. And there used to be 10 people running, and I swear during this pandemic, 1,000 people decided they wanted to start running. And it's mostly because they're just itching to get outside because they can't go outside on their daily basis from work and everything else.
We're also seeing a trend towards people who want better office space. I talked to someone who said they were doing their Zoom meetings from a pantry closet. People want better office spaces, private spaces. So that kind of demand is going to drive a new market too.
The type of house, I think, is also going to start to change in the sense that, we have been so open concept for so many years now. Walls are really nice right now. We don't have a wall between our kitchen and our living room dining space. And we were thinking it would be kind of nice if that was closed off right now. And so I think we're going to see a shift back to actually having formal individual spaces, because people are pretty tired of having the one view of their entire house with the TV on and everything else. And I wouldn't be surprised if those kind of unrenovated, beautiful old colonials and Victorians that are all partitioned off become more valuable.
They're going to get sexy again.
They are.
They are going to. So we have some really great data, and I'd like to show people what's really happening in our market. So we looked up inventory. What is happening with the inventory that we're dealing with right now. And we went and looked at last March 14th to April 14th to this same time period in 2020. And we did that because you'll recall, I think it was March 14th was the Saturday of the first weekend where we had said, we don't think we should be showing property. I think it was Gibson Sotheby's who actually was the first people to close down open houses. But everyone else was kind of going strong at that point. But it quickly evolved. By Monday, we were going to close our offices and leave an administrator. And by Tuesday, we decided that we couldn't have anyone in the offices. Like, things were really going quickly. And that was the beginning of this new pandemic, this new normal. And in that time frame, we are looking at single family inventory in these. I just pulled 3 very big greater Boston counties and looked at inventory for single families is down 32% in Middlesex, 45% in Suffolk, and 35% in Essex County. So we are looking at far less inventory, which means if the buyer demand hasn't dried up that significantly, that's what's driving some of these.
And Linda, definitely why it feels like the market is just as stable in a lot of ways as it was before is specifically because that's probably quite correlated to the amount of buyers who have chosen not to look in the market right now. And so that market, although smaller, is just as consistent as I would say last year. Right.
And we can look at what condos. Condos seem to be have a little bit more inventory. Amazing to see Essex County is only down 14% in inventory. 27% in Suffolk County, and 32% in Middlesex County. So that's just condos. And when we looked at multifamilies, much bigger hit. I think people who are concerned about renters are concerned about trying to sell their multifamily right now, are concerned about trying to show something with tenants in them. All those contribute to the multifamily inventory significantly declining and having the much bigger hit, like 50% in Middlesex and Suffolk.
And I also
County
think
alone.
that just simply comes out of that a lot of small landlords right now, big and small, but certainly the small ones are in a lot more trouble, are collecting less rent. There's people who aren't paying, and there's people who just don't have the physical ability to pay right now. And so when you're looking at your new updated rent roll, when you're looking at the inability to show an occupied unit with a tenant in place, or really you shouldn't be showing a unit with a tenant in place, I'm not surprised at all to see such a large drop. And I think what that means for the market is that there's probably some more buying opportunity than before for multifamilies. But there's also going to be probably a large resurgence of multifamilies coming in the market when I guess the general public deems that it's safe to do so, because this is going to be pent up demand. All of these drops that we're seeing, there's not that there's actually not those properties still sitting there ready to go on. It's not that there's any other market conditions of why they wouldn't want it to list. So when the market does return, we are going to see I think a influx in a lot more, singles, condos, and multis popping on, but especially the multifamilies.
That's right. But now, this is where I think people will be shocked to see how much real estate's really been happening in this last month. So we looked at the under agreement trends. In other words, that same period last year, 2019, mid-March to mid-April to this year. And look what we're seeing. So single family, look how many under agreements there were compared to last year. Everyone thinks the market's stopping. We're only down 7% in Middlesex County. In Suffolk, we're only down 20%. In Essex, we're only down 0.7%. That is not a typo, 0.7%. So property is moving. And so anyone who's reluctant to go on or reluctant to buy should get some feel a little bit better that
a little bit of solace that the market has continued. But also I think what's interesting out of this, and Linda, I'd love your perspective on this, is if we're only seeing this, small to reasonably sized drop in actual under agreements, that probably means because there's less properties on, the absorption rate's actually higher. So it's potential, it's a possibility that we actually are going to see price increases during this period, just because of the lack of what actually is coming on.
Well, you should say that. I didn't want to opine on prices, but I will tell you when I did these charts, and I looked at the under agreement asking prices compared to the under agreement asking last year, they were up in virtually every category. So these are going under agreement. Now, we don't know what they sold for.
We just don't have that data yet.
We don't, but I will tell you that the first week we had a lot more. I saw when we talked to our agents every morning at 9:30, I saw a lot more people feeling empowered and wanting to negotiate. But lately, I'm not hearing that from our agents. I'm hearing that they're selling property and they're getting to pick good offers. And I know that you had 3 offers yesterday, Ramsay, and you you're doing well on 2 of them, I think. But one, you thought you had a great offer and you still got smashed away in Melrose.
Few contingencies and over asking, still wasn't getting it there. But I do want to highlight as well that I would have had, I would have more deals going on right now, but there's just a lot of situations where it's just not appropriate with the COVID guidelines. And so, all the offers that we had are vacant properties showing independently where, the client goes in at a different time. So it is important to highlight that, the business has slowed for a reason. But the properties that we can do it by while still following the guidelines are still extremely competitive.
Right. Let's look quickly at condos. Condos are not bad. We're talking about 25% drop in under agreements for condos.
And I do believe that this is a little bit higher specifically because the condo is a little bit less desirable. In a moment like this, like I said before, that desire for a freestanding space with a little bit more space and a home office is pushing people away from the condos. And I do think that this will come right back around in the future, but for now, it's just a less desirable market.
We've dropped only 25%, but our inventory dropped much more than that. So that's what tells me that the market is super vigorous. And then multifamilies, I got a kick out of Essex County, no change, 0 change in the under agreements. If you had a multifamily you had just as good a chance selling it in the last month as you did last year at this time. And we had a vigorous spring market. So I just thought that was kind of fun to know. All right, so let's talk about some of our other things. So one of the things, I'm going to get out of here. One of the things I wanted to talk about is occupied versus unoccupied and what you're thinking about for the future. We have agents who are actually advising their clients to go get a VRBO for a month and let us sell your home. Clients are moving in with family or relatives or an empty house they know of or a summer vacation house in order to sell the house. And you have a theory about this, Ramsay.
Well, I just think that the most desirable piece of a property is usually put into the top of the MLS listing write-up. And so, you're not going to start with, on the top of your MLS, unfinished attic space or something, that's just not very exciting. What you're going to start with is the best part about the property. And most listings, or a lot of listings I'm seeing right now, are just starting with saying unoccupied property, easier to show. And so I personally believe that safety and ease are going to be the two biggest draws for getting people through a property. And I think ultimately getting more people through will usually result in more offers and a stronger sale price. So, when someone has a vacant home where I can set up a hour-long showing where I know no one else is going to be in the property, I can enter it at a different time than my client, and we don't have to have any kind of social distance issues, that property is going to do better. And so I think we're going to see a softening in the market for occupied homes. I think they're going to be much more careful about who they let through in the future. And I also think that they're going to be the people who don't want to have open houses, who are going to have limited showings, compared to those unoccupied properties, which are just going to get a lot more activity. And I know personally, my clients are more excited to go see an unoccupied property because they think they're going to have an easier time getting through it and have a better showing experience. And I also know that I'm advising most sellers who have an occupied home, it's just not the right time to list if you can't get away from the property.
So exactly, you're spot on, Ramsay. I want to talk about resetting and reinventing ourselves. Eileen made some great points. Eileen Hamlin made some great points yesterday that there have been so many benchmarks in real estate where we thought, everything's changing. It's never going to be the same. She talked about, when she started in real estate, buyers didn't know what house they were going to until they got into her car because she was the only one that knew the address. And they thought, everything's going to change. What's the value of a real estate agent if, we're giving the addresses on the internet to buyers? And yet we all adapted. And, we continue to just change the way we showed property and now what's going on with Zillow and Redfin. And there's just all kinds of new ways of looking at it. There's different tech. We're using all of these digital formats. We're using 3D virtual tours. Everything's changing and it's working toward, someone's like been working up to this, every digital piece of technology we've had has been leading us to this day to reinvent ourselves.
But I also think that most of the technology that we've seen and most of the changes that have happened since, my grandmother Nana and your mom, didn't Nana used to tip someone to get the paper the night before so she could see the listings before everyone else?
The Boston Globe, the Sunday Globe. Yeah, she tried to get it on Saturday so she'd have a head start.
And that was her way of differentiating herself in the market, because at that time actually getting your hands on property was important. Once MLS came in and then once Zillow came in, all of these things we assumed were going to reduce our value, but they haven't, because our value as brokers has never been in finding property. I truly believe that there's occasionally off markets and there's properties that a client would have possibly not seen without us, but in general that's not our value and that's not our proposition. Our value is guiding people through a difficult process. And this process is more difficult than it was before. And so when I have a Zoom call now with my clients to go over what's happening in the market, what should we be offering, what's going to be changing next, it's a little bit of a crystal ball as anyone who's predicting what's going to happen in the future. But most of my value comes through, let's figure out how to put this deal together and let's protect our clients. And I think lately I actually feel more valuable than I did before while we go through that process.
Yeah. Well, I think once we start to accept, okay, for those who don't know, Ramsay, you're my nephew, you're my sister's son. Your cousin Catherine is going to a Zoom wedding on Friday. And they have set it up at 7 o'clock. They've asked people to go through the ceremony with them. And then Catherine and Joe reached out to all their Michigan friends. So they're going to do a dance party and like set up the living room and do a dance party through Zoom. So, I mean, that we never could have foreseen anything like that happening. This is absolutely unprecedented. Your brother told us all about the Tour de Flanders cycling bike race where nobody was outside. They were all on their bikes, and how many watts that they managed to gear out determined a winner. Like, there are just different ways of doing it. And I believe that when we start to accept that these are the ways we have to do business going forward, and it can be done at the highest level. I'd like to talk a little bit about buying and selling virtually and what the hiccups have been and how we're overcoming them. So can you tell us just a little bit, Ramsay, about how you show a house virtually?
Absolutely.
What's your setup?
Yeah, so there's two versions of virtually, and I think the first one is this, the situations where we just truly cannot go into a property in the slightest. And we had a fantastic call, I think it was with Boston Rep, about even having they now have a robot that can go into a property and take photos and everything else. But the first piece that I always like to say is that people have been selling virtually for way longer than this pandemic, and most of it comes through new construction projects. I like to always remind people that when you're selling a new project, when they built the Millennium Tower, most of the units sold before they built it. When they're doing a project, one of the gentlemen in our company, Paul, was working a project in Wakefield. I think it was about at least 60% sold before, or 70% sold before it was even past the foundation. And that's because you're selling people on the vision of what the property is with as much detail as possible. So, from Phil Vita in our company using VR goggles now as well, so people can he can send them a pair and you can walk through the home with a 3D Matterport tour, which I think is the best way right now to sell a home virtually. Floor plans, professional photos, understanding what the ceiling height is. You can get through, I would say, most of the concerns that a buyer has before they even come see the property. And I did want to make one other point, that I do think that people are just going to start seeing less homes, because I think they're going to just get a lot pickier on how people are seeing them or what they're seeing online. And if you can't provide someone all of the data that they could get, or almost all of the data they could get from actually being in the property, then I don't think they're going to be as excited to see it. So I think,
you mean, Ramsay, agents are going to have to start putting room sizes in? I mean, we've seen such lazy ass brokerage for so long. We have seen,
for the longest time, I mean, the process, you get a listing, and in most markets it will sell. And the more competitive the market, the less we see of staging and of actually repainting and fixing up kitchens, because they know that the product, even if it won't sell for as much, will still sell. And so I actually think this whole process is going to elevate the requirements of the real estate industry. Because if you have someone who just throws on photos, doesn't do room measurements, doesn't have a really good floor plan, doesn't have drone photography, a 3D tour so you can walk through the property on your phone or your computer, doesn't have the video that they can send to their relatives, you're doing your clients a disservice as the sellers, because the buyer will not have the information that they need to see if it's worth either the risk to go in, because let's face it, if this pandemic continues as it is expected to, there is inherent risk when going outside, and it's calculated after the I think the stay-at-home order ends. And then also, they're just going to be more excited about the product that has a more interactive view.
Right. And then, okay, so we're all ready to do real estate differently and understand that we shouldn't be waiting. Buyers shouldn't be waiting, sellers shouldn't be waiting. But what is your advice right now to sellers? What would be your advice if people don't move unless they have a problem, like they have to sell for a reason, and that's always been the case. They need more space. They don't need all the space. They want to reduce their costs. They are getting divorced. There has been a death and there's an estate. There's some reason that causes people to sell, and they've been frozen for the last month. But I think the whole message needs to be, this is the new reality and let's help you. But what's your advice to sellers?
So I think it's very dependent. There's certainly tons of situations where my advice would just be stay at home, wait for a little bit longer. There's people who have higher risk factors for COVID-19. There's people who just shouldn't be in the process of moving. But I think also my biggest advice for sellers right now is there a way that we can take advantage of this market. And if you, one of my favorite quotes by Warren Buffett, I believe it is, be greedy when people are fearful and fearful when people are greedy. There's a lot of fear right now, and it's really justified. But is there a way where in a market where there's extremely low inventory, we have the ability to either buy first and get your property vacant and then allow to be sold then, or can we get you that Cape house for 3 months in the summer, sell your property, and then do that upgrade or downgrade completely separately? And the other thing that I'm telling a lot of sellers right now, because I have a lot of trade up sellers, and they're worried that the market will be getting softer, and it may or it may not. We don't know exactly yet. We just haven't seen that data. But what I've been telling all of them is, if your property is worth $50,000 less, your trade up is going to be worth $100,000 less, because those markets are going to move together. And so I'm trying to always look at that big picture for a seller of what is the actual end goal, and then what are the risks and rewards to get there, and how can we assist? We are starting to sell homes that people have never been into. It is certainly a stressful way to do it, and I think we're going to see a higher amount of deals fall apart during the process because of it. But we are going to get creative. And what I will tell people is that if you assume that this is going to go back to business as usual very soon, I think sadly you're going to be mistaken. And if I'm wrong, then everyone who starts implementing the tools today to sell better online will still do better after this is over as well. And I think the new normal will be a better online package, a better understanding of virtual selling. And even if people can still go back into that home, that better package isn't going to go away.
I just want to clarify something in case people didn't pick up what you were putting down there, Ramsay, that, certainly it's been our policy at Leading Edge that we would show unoccupied property one at a time, carefully, with all of the precautions, and that occupied property, we were trying to sell completely virtually and then wait to see we had an acceptable offer to see if we could let them in, because we did know that as much as we can give them all that information with all the tools you've already outlined, that you want to smell a house. You want to really understand your views. Yeah.
You need to see if the floors are a little bit curvy. Do they squeak? How do you feel about the light out of the window? There's always going to be that requirement. But what we're trying to do is limit, instead of getting 50 people through a property and creating risk, can we get one through when we already know that this is the product for them in any discernible way, except for that final reaction to the space? Absolutely.
Okay, now let's switch to buyers. We were talking today, and did Katja Pitts tell us that her buyer just got an ARM for 2.85%. That's unbelievable money right now in this market. We're not expecting interest rates to go up, except for we're going to cause all kinds of inflation with the way the government's borrowing money, but that's for another day and another discussion.
It is.
What is happening what is your advice to buyers in this market?
Well, I think it's again, and I hate to say so many times it all depends, but I think every single situation is incredibly different right now. And I think one of our biggest values as agents is guiding people through just what options they actually have in the moment. I think it depends on what you're looking for and where you're looking as well. So in the multifamily world, I have called every single investor that I'm working with saying, be prepared to react quickly to a deal, because there is a lot of concern in that part of the market with people not being able to access properties. And I'll be honest, the only time that people really will buy things without seeing them is a 4-unit investment property where we have all of the details and we have a past inspection report or some kind of systems check or whatever else it is, because those are the times that people don't care about kind of the finish and feel. They care about the cap rate return. And so that part of the market, I'm telling those buyers to get ready to look for and hunt for opportunities. That opportunity is specifically coming once something sits on the market a little bit longer. It was usually, a little bit of negotiation would happen. I do personally believe there's going to be bigger price adjustments if something sits. If you're new to market, I think there's still a good chance to, get a big push and do really well. But if you start to sit, I think it's going to be a dangerous time for a lot of multifamily clients. And then the rest of buyers is, we're just trying to be smart. We're focusing on the unoccupied properties, but we're also spending a lot more time to do education up front before we see homes. And I think one of the things that happens for agents is that we still assume that part of our most of our value comes through opening the lockbox and getting them in. And that's just not the case. And so the more time that we can spend educating about location, area, what the market analytics are like, what they're really looking for, their needs and wants list, and applying those needs and wants directly to all the different markets and seeing, how their list and their price works and doesn't work in some areas, and getting them really honed in on that end property that they're really looking for before they go and see it, the better off they're going to be and the safer we're going to be in this market. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but years ago, there was a guy who came and spoke with our company who said, on average, he shows his buyer clients 4 or 5 homes max.
It was Paul Delbon. Yeah.
Because he spent so much time educating and working on what that client really actually wants instead of going and seeing as many things as possible. And I think what happens for a lot of those buyers is that, and I get happens to me all the time. I have a client who wants to live in Beacon Hill only, and all of a sudden we're looking in Eastie, and I say, why are we going over to Eastie? Well, that's the property that I want. But would you live in Eastie? Well, no, I don't want to live in Eastie. Well, then why are we going to Eastie to look at a property? And it's because, you start to lose that rigid sense of what's important to you. And I think more than ever now, one of the jobs of an agent is to keep that focus and to help hone that focus.
I think you answered the last part I wanted to end with, which was, action steps for agents. What should we be doing? And I think you've outlined, understanding and not being in denial that the market has changed, that we need to adopt all of these technologies, that there is a vigorous real estate market. It's right here now. We shouldn't be waiting for it. It's already here. And that those who are concerned that this is scary, that things can't be done during this time, aren't going to be very successful. And those who embrace the mindset that I can help these people and get the job done will get it done.
I think that's very true. And I'm 30 as of a couple of weeks ago, so I'm in a lower risk bracket than a lot of people for this. And so when every single time I go and do any type of business or anything outside, I always think to myself, this is not, am I keeping myself safe? It's, am I keeping my grandmother safe? If I see, and I'm not currently, but if I was to go see someone who was older or had some health issue, am I doing this to keep myself safe or someone else safe? And the answer is someone else safe. And so you have to work in that mindset constantly. But what I'll say for agents is that, this is I think a lot of people have said, if only I had a little bit of time to stop, reset, I could work on my new business Facebook page, I could work on my website, I could work on my CRM system. This is the time to do that. This is the time to get much better and much more honed in on how to work with buyers and how to get them educated and focused. It's the best time to work on a full listing plan up front, so there is no question marks that people have. No one should be asking how old the heating system is later or needs to go in for one more room measurement. All of that should be done up front. I certainly think that it's overwhelming as well. I think people who assume you have to sit here in your home all day working constantly, it's also not going to happen. I'm proud to say that I'm at least halfway through all of the James Bond films. I think I've got like 9 or 10 left. That's perfectly okay to do as well. But this is the relentless focus period where we can build ourselves and we can come out of this with a much better plan. And I don't mean come out of this in 30 days. I mean come out of this, from tomorrow until next year with a much better plan of how we list and how we help people buy and much better tools to do it.
Yeah, that was terrific. So Ramsay, thanks for being our guest this week on the Leading Edge, our Facebook Live. And with that, we're looking forward to seeing you all again soon.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rams. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.